Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House and MLA for Calgary-Egmont. After question period today, the House will resolve itself into Committee of Supply to deal with various estimates related to the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. The House sat till 10 o'clock last night working on a similar set of estimates. One of the departments examined was the Department of Environment. The government also has some special motions on the order paper, which will be dealt with in the near future, one of which is to extend greetings and congratulations to the citizens of the communities of Fort Chipewyan and Fort Vermilion on the occasion of their bicentennial years.
O Lord, we give thanks for the bounty of our province, our land, our resources, and our people. We pledge ourselves to act as good stewards on behalf of all Albertans. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committee.
Member for Drumheller.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 93, I have taken under consideration the question of the following petitions which did not comply with Standing Order 86 and recommend to the Assembly that the provisions of Standing Order 88 with respect to the deadline for completion of advertising be waived to permit those bills to be dealt with. Number 1, the petition of Alistair McIntosh for Bill PR 16, Leslie Roy Peck Adoption Act. Number 2, the petition of Victor Peter Hetmazuk and Nestor Zenon Papish for the Bill PR 17, St. Vladimir's Ukrainian Orthodox Congregation Calgary Taxation Exemption Act. 3, the petition of Donald Roy Dean for the Bill PR 18, Donald Roy Dean Compensation Act. 4, the petition of the Calgary Municipal Heritage Properties Authority for Bill PR 19, Calgary Municipal Heritage Properties Authority Amendment Act 1988. And 5, the petition of Leo Cattleman, Simon Three Fingers, Eddie Littlechild, Jim Omisku, and Morris Wolf for Bill PR 20, Masco-Eschis Cultural College Act. I request the concurrence of the Assembly in this recommendation.
Does the Assembly concur in the report as presented by the Honourable Member for Drumheller? Opposed? Carried.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Honourable members, I have the pleasure of submitting to the Assembly the first annual report of the Alberta Legislative Assembly Office.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, 1 year ago in this Assembly, I had the pleasure of announcing that the village of Riley would become the first community in Alberta to undertake a municipal-wide composting project, and I introduced the mascot for the project and the community, Captain Compost. Love is the most powerful force, Mr. Speaker, and anyone who has experienced love will know how capturing, captivating, and all-encompassing it can be. Captain Compost has been smitten, Mr. Speaker, and with his success in Riley has earned the respect and love of a delightful young damsel who has now become Mrs. Captain Compost. This couple is in the members' gallery, Mr. Speaker, and they are escorted by His Worship, Mayor Larry Andruko, Sheila Fitt, Doug McClellan, and Darrell Albright of the village of Riley. Hopefully in a year from now, the composting project in Riley will continue its successful accomplishments, and we will be able to welcome to the Assembly the gift of the compost's love, young junior Captain Compost. Mr. Speaker, would our colleagues in the Assembly kindly welcome all of our guests today?
Member for Athabasca Lac-La-Biche, followed by Vermilion Viking.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly Ms. Sandy Rain. Sandy Rain is a grade 11 student at Edward Parr Community School in Athabasca, a county of champions. She recently returned from the National Debating Championship held in Newfoundland, where she won the title of Top Canadian Overall Debater. She is only the second Albertans to ever win this title. Sandy has won the top individual debater in the Alberta Provincial Debate Final for the last 3 years. She has debated in the United States as well as Canada. She's a very worthy Canadian champion. Sandy is sitting in the Speaker's Gallery, and she is accompanied by her parents, Fred and Gloria Rain. And also in the Members' Gallery, accompanied by Mr. John Beattie, Executive Director of the Alberta Debate and Speech Association. Would they please rise and accept our warm congratulations?
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and to members of the Legislative Assembly 27 grade 6 students from the Manville School from the constituency of Vermilion Viking. These students are truly representative of the strong foundation and future that the province of Alberta has. They are accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Susan Kern, Miss Laverne Feckrell, their parents, Dorothy Dimitrov and Janice Clennett, and Mr. Ron Kern. Their bus driver is also with them, Mr. Enoch Nielsen. They are seated in the Members' Gallery, and I would ask them to stand and receive this warm welcome of this Assembly.
Solicitor General, followed by Calgary Forest Lawn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly 30 grade 8 students from Balf. They're accompanied by their teacher, Mrs. Margaret Pirro, by parents Bev Huseby, Terry Moore, Maureen Hoffman, and their bus driver, Gerald Roth. They're seated in the Members' Gallery, and I'd ask that they stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 30 students from the Bishop Kids School. They're grades 7, 8, and 9 students. The Bishop Kids School is located in Calgary Forest Lawn. The students are accompanied by their teachers, Larry Hope and Greg Clark. I'd ask that they rise and receive the usual warm welcome of the Assembly.
Red Deer South, followed by Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly a friend of mine from the city of Edmonton, Mr. Jim Ragsdale. Jim is seated in the public gallery, and I would ask that he would stand and receive the warm reception of this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure today to introduce to you and to all members of the Assembly Angela Bass, a friend visiting our fine province from London, England. I would ask that she stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, now we know why the government has been stalling on the principal affair. Mr. Speaker, documents filed with the Code investigation, I might say over the objection of government lawyers, indicate clearly that the government cabinet ministers overruled regulators consistently in order to keep the failed principal group companies in operation. My question to the Premier, I wonder if the Premier will inform the House whether he was aware of this at the time the Cabinet revoked the licenses of First and Associated Investors last June.
Well, we're sub judice is great concern.
Mr. Speaker, we have to be, of course, sensitive to the fact that it's before a court-ordered hearing. I might point out to the House that this is the government's request to the court to order this hearing. Also that the government requested the Ombudsman, as a matter of fact, ordered the Ombudsman to have his hearing into this matter, and that I have asked Your Honour the Lieutenant Governor to allow all members of Cabinet to be released from their oath of office as members of Cabinet so that they can contribute to that code inquiry to the greatest extent possible. So halfway through the inquiry, it doesn't seem to, or a third of the way, or two-thirds, whatever, to make much sense to start trying to second-guess what's coming out. I think we should have the whole inquiry, which I'm looking forward to have all the facts, and have set it up in a way that we would have all the facts. So it seems unwise to try now and comment halfway through it, except to say I was interested in noting that Premier Manning had the problem as well. So it certainly has gone back some time.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not talking about what's before. I was not talking about what's before the code inquiry. I was asking about why the government revoked the particular issues. There must have been a reason, Mr. Speaker, but if the Premier doesn't want to answer, I take it by that non-answer he does have an answer. But I will come, Mr. Speaker. It's obvious to Albertans already that we have public documents, and this point is made clear that over many years, the Premier goes back to Manning, that members were aware that there was problems with this company. Now, my question to the Premier, will the Premier advise then what considerations led the Cabinet to reverse its position in June of 1987 and left the licenses after all these years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there was a different cabinet under Premier Manning. There was a different cabinet under Premier Strome, and a different cabinet under Premier Lougheed. And they all obviously must have had considerations and dealt with facts at the time. The facts that dealt with when I was Premier were such that when we had the facts, we moved to fulfill the responsibilities under the legislation. And we did that. Now, for the honourable member to preface his question by saying, if the government doesn't want to answer, I think is a very, very misleading comment to make. I just said to the House that this hearing is as a result of government's request of the courts, that the Ombudsman at the order of the courts is getting information out. All of our cabinet material is available and has never been available before. Cabinet members have never had their oath of office rescinded before. So I frankly think, Mr. Speaker, that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is trying to present a case that is completely false, and that the real thing to do here is to have all the facts out and let's hear the results of this inquiry. But we're certainly not trying to cover up anything.
Mr. Speaker, how can you say that I'm bringing out the things that are false, Mr. Speaker, and then say that everything's before the public inquiry? My question then, Mr. Speaker, is that we're trying to know what the government knew about the licensing of these companies going back at the time that this Premier was a cabinet minister. But I'll ask this question. Will the Premier advise whether he is aware of any other instances in which cabinet ministers overruled the regulators to grant licenses to companies which posed undue risk to the investing public?
Again, Mr. Speaker, he is now dealing with incomplete evidence. He has just said another time when cabinet ministers overruled regulators. He doesn't even know whether that happened, because obviously there was some evidence given before an inquiry yesterday. And really, I find it hard to imagine the Honourable Leader of the Opposition pursuing this line of questioning at this time. It seems to me we have done everything possible to get all this information out. All the cabinet documents are now available on this matter. All members of cabinet are available to the inquiry. That's exactly the way it should be done under a court order. I think we're going to get it all out. Let's have it. But let's not try and draw mini conclusions resulting from something he happens to read in the newspaper.
Mr. Speaker, people want you to answer the questions, not hide behind the code inquiry, Mr. Speaker. That had nothing to do with the code inquiry, and the Premier's well aware of it. So obviously he knew, Mr. Speaker.
Question, honourable member.
This is a public document, and certain of the licenses issued to the collapsed investment companies were apparently issued with a disclaimer, and I quote quickly one sentence. This should not be interpreted as indicating acceptance of the financial or other conditions existing in the company. That was in 1975 when this Premier was a minister. My question is this the type of protection which the Alberta government offers innocent investors?
Well, obviously, Mr. Speaker, he is referring to a different Alberta government, and I can't speak for a different Alberta government. Whether I was Minister of Energy or Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs at that time in the past, there was a different cabinet, a different Premier, and I really find that literally an absurd position for the honourable member to be taking at this stage.
Agreed.
However, I guess the questions and the kind of things that he finds right now should be asked in the legislature in the question period have deteriorated that he's dropped to this.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party. Supplementary, Calgary Buffalo, followed by Leader of the Opposition.
To the Premier, many investors are badly in need of funds and quickly for living expenses, and it's clear that the government has some responsibility by virtue of its knowledge. And I'm wondering whether the government would agree to purchase the assets of associated and first investors at the current value, similar to what they did for the credit unions, in order to ensure that the investors get the 65% that they need now, not in dribs and drabs, and leave the balance, the shortfall, 30%.
Thank you, honourable member. This is a supplementary, not a 20-page paragraph.
To be clarified, though.
Thank you.
And leave the ultimate responsibility for the shortfall to be determined through the Code Commission or whatever other entity is responsible for that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this question has been asked and answered several times in the legislature in this spring session. I'd only say this to the honourable member. Having put in place the comprehensive investigation under the courts, having put in place the availability of all cabinet ministers to that inquiry, having put in place the availability of all cabinet documents to that inquiry, having ordered the ombudsman to look into every possible feature of this to make sure that that anything the government may have done that could have impacted on this is open and before the public. Having done all of those things, we have taken the position we should wait for the results of those inquiries in order to, before taking any action. I think that's what the public of Alberta would want.
Thank you. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, the member from Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Premier. This government is constantly downplaying the economic and environmental benefits of an ethanol industry, Mr. Speaker, and at the same time, they're actively promoting and willing to help finance the oil company's product that competes with ethanol, and that is MTBE. Now, the news yesterday, Mr. Speaker, was that this government's negative attitude is driving potential investors out of Alberta. Right. The news today is that the MTBE plant is on hold, and I think this creates a window of opportunity for ethanol, and I'd like to ask the Premier if he's willing to commit this government to a 4-cent a litre fuel tax break on ethanol, so that if an industry is to develop, it's got as much chance to develop in our province as it does in our neighbouring provinces.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to first comment on the honourable member's lead-up to his question, where he says the government is constantly putting down any development in the ethanol industry. That is absolutely incorrect. The government has worked with the applicants to such a proposal. As a matter of fact, as a result of the Leader of the Opposition's comments yesterday, I committed to the House that I'd look into the dealings with Ethanol Energies Limited, and I can tell the House that on 10 different occasions, either by letter or meeting, the government discussed the potential investment with the prospective investor. And the government left it on this basis. would you please make an application so that we can assist you if at all possible? That was in October of 1987, that long ago, and nothing has followed through on it. And it was a request to positively help this investment in the province, and they did not follow up, and that was the final. Yes, and so I can hardly accept from the honourable member that the government is trying to put this down. Now, there's no question that the Minister of Agriculture and the member for Vegreville have gone back and forth many times in the House in the spring session. They can go back and forth again, I suppose, and in any further details, I may ask the member, the Minister of Agriculture to respond, the honourable member.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier said in this Assembly yesterday, and I quote, "The fact of the matter is that even with the assistance, there are no economics," in reference to the ethanol industry. If that's not a negative attitude, I don't know what is. Now, I'd like to ask the Premier, he knows that the ethanol industry is alive and doing well in Minnedosa, Manitoba, and the Minister of Agriculture has been invited. Will the Premier instruct the Minister of Agriculture to accept the gracious invitation of the Mayor of Minnedosa and go there and see firsthand just what an industry in action can do for a small rural community?
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Agriculture can respond for himself. I would say, Mr. Speaker, in terms of investments for small rural communities, this government is attracting investments at a level that has never been seen before in this province.
That's right. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier continually likes to make reference to his strong leadership, and I'll quote from the document he released at the Western Premiers Conference that they're committed to enhanced cooperation and economic development and diversification among the Western provinces. Clearly, ethanol is one of the best opportunities we've got, and I'd like to ask the Premier what kind of leadership is he demonstrating when ethanol was not even discussed or mentioned in their communique coming out of this Western Premiers Conference?
I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, even the honourable member from Vegreville would know that many things were discussed in 3 days of meetings that didn't get into some 13 communiques.
I'd like to ask the Premier, I'm sure he's aware that the Minister of Agriculture recently spent thousands of taxpayers' dollars placing ads in weekly newspapers in Alberta that contain no new information, the same information that he put out in a press release a month earlier. And I'd like to ask the Premier if he approves of this practice of a minister in his cabinet wasting money trying to salvage his tarnished reputation out in rural Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member certainly is incorrect when he's talking about reputations. I've travelled throughout this province, meet with many, many people in rural Alberta. This was exemplified clearly in the by-election in Chinook when the NDP lost their deposit virtually in disgrace. And Mr. Speaker, we meet with the people throughout rural Alberta, and the Minister of Agriculture and the Associate Minister of Agriculture constantly have their names raised. The people of Alberta raise their names and the job they're doing with me and tell me what a superb job they are representing agriculture in this province.
Thank you. Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Assuming that the Premier, after looking once again at this kind of project, determined that in fact with a subsidy of say 4 cents a litre on ethanol, this project would be economically viable, is the Premier prepared to commit today in this legislature that under the free trade agreement, even if he wanted to, he would be able to put in that kind of subsidy to make that kind of diversification program work in this province?
Mr. Speaker, once again, the honourable member tries to turn most subjects into a negative attack on a free trade agreement, which the people of Alberta feel so strongly is something that they really want and can use for future economic growth in this province. It is disappointing and it is a shame that the party who fought so hard to support the National Energy Program that hurt this province, now the same party attacks the free trade agreement, which helps this province. And I tell the honourable members of the Liberal Party and their socialist friends beside them. That what they should do is get out and meet the people of Alberta and understand that they are the people who want this free trade agreement.
Chair recognizes Calgary Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To either the Minister of Economic Development or our Minister of Agriculture, would either of them be able to comment on the total cost, both from the standpoint of capital cost and subsidization of this industry that would be required if we were to look at it at this point in time?
Mr. Speaker, the studies that we have done to date indicate that we would require a subsidy of somewhere between 25 and 29 cents per litre in the event that we were involved with ethanol production. And let me just take this opportunity to underscore a couple of comments that the Premier made, whereby we are working with our federal counterparts in developing a more concise report so that we will have a more balanced approach to make a decision as it relates to ethanol, to the extent that we do have meetings with our federal counterparts on June 8th and 9th as it relates to the ethanol industry. I had an opportunity yesterday when we had our agricultural meeting to discuss this issue with the Minister responsible for grains, the Honourable Charlie Mayer, and we are continuing with it, Mr. Speaker, but we want to do so on the basis of fact, and we are going to continue to do so on the basis of fact, recognizing that there are pros and cons, and we are going to make sure that we have a full and thorough analyzation of it.
Okay. Main question for the Liberal Caucus, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, your prayers have been answered. Mr. Speaker, it has become apparent that the Department of Social Services censoring Don Bosco and not letting anyone know why, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister state whether there's any specific reasons about the quality and type of care, she has any specific concerns about the quality and care of the Bosco homes?
Mr. Speaker, I hope that I heard the honourable member's entire comments, but we did discuss this subject yesterday, and if the honourable member did not hear, he could read in Hansard where I said that I believe they were probably delivering good care. But the honourable member must realize that there are many people who they have the opportunity to refer their children to Bosco and other organizations. Social services is not the only area where services for children are delivered in this province.
There, thank you. I'm glad to hear that, because then if she has such faith in Bosco, and this thing with troubled youth, would she accept from me a list of over 100 names of parents, individuals who wish to have their children placed in Bosco ranches? Would she accept that list?
Mr. Speaker, the delivery of appropriate services to children who may have some behavioral or other problems is not one that it is easy for the minister or the leader of the Liberal Party or indeed parents solely to be able to address. People spend many years studying what would be appropriate services and treatment for these children. Such people work for the Department of Social Services and review and assess very carefully the needs of children who become our responsibility. Mr. Speaker, there are many other children outside of the framework of the Department of Social Services who could avail themselves of Bosco if it was required.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, supplementary minister, but does she not realize that she has put a very unfair negative light on Bosco ranches by the Edmonton District's refusal to refer any people to Bosco ranches?
Mr. Speaker, there are many organizations, as I stated yesterday, who would like to have guaranteed referrals from the Department of Social Services, and because they do not, does not mean that they don't deliver appropriate services. Again, Mr. Speaker, a reminder of my comments at previous times, we cut institutional beds in the Edmonton region and to expand our services directly to families. And it is not fair then, once having done that and denied other organizations the potential for serving children in an institutional way that are looked after by the Department of Social Services, that to then bring in the services of another organization when there was no guarantee that services would be delivered by them. But again, Mr. Speaker, other regions in the province may refer to Bosco and if they do not have the appropriate plan in place to serve their children.
Bosco, Mr. Speaker, that's just the problem. There's confusion somewhere. Outside districts have been told to refer referrals through the Edmonton office to the Bosco Ranch, yet when they try to do that, Edmonton office refuses to go on. So how can an outside district get their patients or charges into Don Bosco Ranch if it has to go through an Edmonton office, one that is trying to blackball Don Bosco Ranches?
Mr. Speaker, the regional director for the Edmonton region has written what I believe to be a very clear letter to the executive director of Bosco Homes. There is absolutely no impediment in the Edmonton region to services at Bosco. However, when a youngster comes from another region, the Edmonton region has offered, and this may be difficult for them in a budget sense, but they have offered the supervision of that youngster, because obviously if the youngster happens to come from the far south part of the province, a social worker or psychologist is not going to be journeying constantly to Edmonton in order to assess the treatment given. So the Edmonton region has offered to take over that supervision. There is absolutely no impediment, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Edmonton Calder, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary to the Minister. Waiting lists for services for children in the Edmonton region are very serious. And I'd like to know what specific action is the Minister taking to deal with the lack of services for children?
Mr. Speaker, I would not at all agree with the honourable member's comments that there is a lack of services for children. We will stack up our services for children in the province of Alberta against any province in this country, and indeed against any jurisdiction in North America. And Mr. Speaker, it does not mean that we couldn't do more, but there has to be a balance in our delivery. I believe that the people of Alberta have very generously supported services to children, and indeed in the Edmonton region.
Member for Little Bow on behalf of the Representative Caucus, followed by Wainwright.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier, and it's a follow-up of other questions I've asked in terms of the fair share in allocating federal funding to various provinces of Canada. In 1986, the province of Quebec received 50% of the equalization payments made by the federal government. 1987, Quebec got close to 40% of all regional industrial grants, in spite of only having 26% of Canada's total population. To the Premier, in view of these figures, does the Premier agree that Quebec is consistently outperforming Alberta in securing federal funding, and what steps does the province of Alberta plan to take at this current time to make sure or correct this situation for us in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting the honourable member puts it in the way of performance. I don't know whether it is performance, because equalizations obviously flows to provinces that do poorly rather than that do well. And so if you're talking about comparisons for performance, equalization would not flow to this province because we outperform others. It's the people of this province who are strong, tough people who are able to operate and compete in Canada and throughout the world and don't need those type of subsidies. So, but going back to the original part of his question, which is that certain federal payments go to Quebec on a higher than a percentage basis. This is a percentage of population basis. This is raised with the federal government, both by members of the federal cabinet from Alberta, members of the House of Commons from Alberta, members of our cabinet, myself and other premiers, and was raised in the Western Premiers Conference just last week. I draw the honourable member's attention to the communique which covered that portion.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Premier, Quebec has been promised, as of in the last few days, $1 billion regional development package. Given that there's only a limited amount of dollars, federal dollars available, will the Premier make a case to the Prime Minister at the first possible opportunity with regards to this program to ensure that a disproportionate share of federal funds do not go to Quebec to the detriment of Alberta in terms of our funds?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that position has already been made.
Mr. Speaker, a final supplementary, and it relates to the Premier's comment with regards to the Western Premier's meeting. Could the Premier indicate if there is a united plan that is in place at the present time that will be coordinated by the 4 Western Premiers, presented to the federal government to ensure this equity distribution of federal funding to Western Canada?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplement. Athabaskalakalish.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, presently only northwestern Alberta enjoy a federal special incentive tax credit to encourage manufacturing and processing industries in the northern part of the province. Why isn't the province fighting harder to extend that SITC to all of northeastern Alberta so that much needed manufacturing and processing industry can create more jobs in that area of the province?
Well, we are, Mr. Speaker, and we have. But I should also point out to the honourable member that if he's talking about investments in northern Alberta, that this province currently has an all-time high of investments in the forestry industry, $1.5 billion of forestry investments currently underway or about to start in the province. We have on the planning desk right now a potential for some $12 billion in oil sands plants. We have a $1.27 billion Husky upgrader. We have the conventional oil industry, as a result of government's assistance, very, very strong. We have the heavy oil projects in northeastern Alberta at an all-time high. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, some $14 to $15 billion of investments flowing throughout this province at a rate that's never been matched before. And I haven't even talked about such things as expansions of the Nova natural gas pipeline system of $1 billion, the interprovincial pipeline system expansion of another $1 billion. There are now, as a result of this government's efforts to turn the economy around and diversify it, the best look forward now that we've had in a long, long time in this province. It's a whole new period of growth that is about to start in this province, and Albertans are going to participate in it.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar. Edmonton Gold Bar.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. My supplementary question is to the provincial treasurer related to national fairness. To the treasurer, how are we making out with our so-called strong and aggressive pitch for our lost equalization funds? When can we hope to see the money?
As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I signed a letter to Mr. Wilson just yesterday to confirming the final calculation. The numbers are larger than I expected, Mr. Speaker, but I am hesitant to reveal them because, of course, we want to be sure that we have all the fundamental data in place. But in the context of established program arrangement, which was the member's question, in fact, this is one of the benefits which the province of Alberta will gather back from the central government based on the established program financing and the concept of fairness within government within Canada. It's a large contribution to us, Mr. Speaker, and it'll be important in our fiscal plan.
Thank you. Wainwright, followed by Calgary Mountain View, then Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Energy, we continue to hear of the many dollars involved in the heavy oil and the oil sands sector. However, many of us would be interested in hearing more about the conventional sector. Could the Minister update the members of the Assembly as to the current drilling activity in this province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member provides an opportunity to indicate that we have very significant activity in this province. And of course, I might add, during the course of the spring session, not a word from the opposition ranks about activity in the conventional side, because there's nothing but good news, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker. And the drilling activity in this province is almost double, Mr. Speaker, what the numbers were last year at this time. As of yesterday, there were 195 rigs that were on the move or drilling in this province. And the meeting that I had a week ago with the Petroleum Services Association of Canada, their outlook for the rest of the year was very, very promising.
Thank you. Could the Minister indicate what the interest in the province's land sales are? And I would be particularly interested in his comments on the reserves from the Wainwright military base.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I welcome the opportunity for another good question from the honourable member from Wainwright. I had just commented on the amount of drilling activity that had occurred in the province. There are other statistics that one could use relating to the number of well licenses issued, and for the year up to the end of May, we had almost 3,000 well licenses issued, and that's over 200%. It's 200% higher than that same time period in 1987, and in fact, for the first 3 months this year, it was an all-time record. Wells spudded, Mr. Speaker. Up to the end of May, some 2,800 wells spudded, and that is 110% higher than the year before, and that is with a 3-year royalty holiday in place, whereas the previous year there was a 5-year royalty holiday in place. So there's a very significant increase in drilling activity there. On the land sales side, for the first, up to the end of May this year, some $247 million in land sales. Again, that's significantly up from last year. Mr. Speaker, there are other statistics, other evidence that one could point to, but you ask the people in the supply service sector and the drilling sector in this province, and they'll tell you that activity is up significantly.
Supplementary, could the Minister tell us when the development of the recent land sales in the Wainwright military base will be taking place? And can you assure us that it will not interfere with the training maneuvers on the base?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the question about the Wainwright Military Reserve is, of course, a follow-up to a question the honourable member asked a couple of weeks ago, following the very significant agreement that we have with the federal government for exploration and development on the Wainwright Military Reserve. And following the seismic work that we did and the information being made available to the industry, the first land sale brought in revenues of $8.5 million. That was a few weeks ago. The second sale occurred this morning, and again, another $8 million in the land sale there. So we are very, very happy with the prospects for the Wainwright Military Reserve. With respect to exploration and drilling occurring at the same time as maneuvers occurring on the military range, the agreement has taken that into account. I can assure the honourable member that the activity in the oil sector will not be interfering with the maneuvers.
Cloverbar.
Speaker, a supplementary to the Honourable Minister. It's a common practice to thank a member for advance notice. Will the Minister thank the member from Wainwright for giving advance notice for the question?
Do it. To recognize is Calgary Buffalo.
Member for advance notice, he gives me sometimes too.
Calgary Buffalo supplementary.
Conventional oil is being found in unexpected amounts, and as a result, a great deal of this oil is starting to be shut in again because of pipeline incapacity. I'm wondering what the minister is doing to deal with this problem at the same time as it encourages some of the larger mega projects which are going to compound that difficulty down the line.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member, if you listened to what the Premier had commented earlier about projects in the future, they would have heard that interprovincial pipelines, or now inter-home pipelines, are meeting with industry people with respect to the possible development of a $1 billion development of pipeline space. Yes, the pipeline capacity has been filled. The shut-in problem of a few years ago was alleviated to a considerable degree a year ago, so that shut-in was not a problem. In fact, the honourable member says there's a great deal of shut-in today. That is not true. There's not a great deal of shut-in today. There is very small amounts that are shut in now. However, with the increased production, more production than what had been anticipated, and the future production from oil sands and heavy oil, certainly there will be a need for either expansion of pipelines, upgrading to occur in this province to convert the heavy oil to light oil, or both. So, Mr. Speaker, the problems associated with the future production coming on this province are being addressed.
Thank you. Calgary Forest Lawn, final supplementary on this topic.
Mr. Speaker, supplemental to the Minister of Energy. With respect to that $1 billion pipeline expansion that he referred to, that plan is to move heavy oil to the coast. What action is the minister taking to ensure that more of that heavy oil is refined here in the province of Alberta?
Oh, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is not correct. The inter-home pipeline runs eastward, and the West Coast transmission pipeline runs westward, and we were talking about the $1 billion pipeline that Interhome have, and then in addition to that, West Coast are looking at an expansion as well.
Member for Calgary Mountain View, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar, Elwood, Didsbury, Edmonton Calder, Bow Valley, Edmonton Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many Albertans were encouraged last March when the Premier decided to get personally involved in trying to solve an outstanding injustice experienced for the past 48 years by the Lubicon Lake people in northern Alberta. Unfortunately, his federal cousin in Ottawa, the Minister of Indian Affairs, doesn't seem to want to pursue serious negotiations. Instead, he's decided to sue the Alberta government and the Lubicon band. Will the Premier give the legislature an update of what, if anything, he's done since this federal action to get honest, productive negotiations on track, or is he content to allow the federal minister to trash negotiations?
Yes. I'm sorry, this is clearly sub judice. I'm sorry.
I'm asking what the Premier is doing about negotiations.
Yeah, oh, come
I'm
on.
not asking about the court case, Mr. Speaker.
Let him answer.
Well, it's done.
Let him answer.
I don't see anyone raising, so supplementary. What's the next question?
A question about the Premier's initiative to seek out productive negotiations on this issue. Well,
got nothing to do with the court
I'd like
case.
to ask the Premier if he's appealed directly to the Prime Minister to help in solving this outstanding issue, and if he has Mr. Mulrooney agreed to become involved in negotiations between the two levels of government?
Clearly not so much.
Mr. Speaker, there are, I guess, two questions on the floor after the first one, which you ruled was sub judice, whatever that term is. But, Mr. Speaker, I have discussed it with the Prime Minister, and as I've often had to tell members of the House, and I need to tell them now, that discussions between myself and the Prime Minister or other premiers, I cannot discuss publicly. Those are private discussions, and I have discussed it with them, though.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation clearly is not a good one for Alberta or for Canada, and it seems to be deteriorating. Would the Premier today commit to the legislature that he would do all in his power as Premier to convene a summit meeting between himself, Chief Arminiac, and the Prime Minister in order to try and find common ground between the three parties for a just political solution to this issue?
Mr. Speaker, I think as honourable members know, the Chief Arminiac and myself have had discussions, and the Alberta government has aligned itself with the Lubicon band. We are going to work with them We did not want to enter an agreement with the federal government that the ban did not feel was fair. You recall, Mr. Speaker, I raised in this legislature that the number one issue between ourselves and the Lubicon ban on which we agreed was that any movements on behalf of the Alberta government or the band would come as a result of both of us agreeing it was a fair arrangement. We were unable to accept that the federal government's position met that term of fairness with the Lubicon ban. Therefore, we felt it would be wise to have a tribunal in which the governments would put on a member, the Lubicon ban would nominate a member, and those two would select a third. That has not found favor with the federal government. And therefore, the band and ourselves continue to to seek other solutions.
Mr. Speaker, if the Chief and the Premier can find common ground, surely the Prime Minister, as being a part of that, could as well. What steps is the Premier prepared to take now, given his answer that the federal government doesn't seem to be willing to move on this? What steps is he preparing to take now to get this issue out of the hands of the lawyers and back into the hands of the politicians where it belongs in order to find a just solution?
I can only say, Mr. Speaker, that I've answered that previously, and I have discussed the matter with the Prime Minister. Our Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs is discussing this matter with the federal government's ministers, and of course there are also negotiators representing the federal government and representing the Alberta government who have discussions as well.
Thank you. Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have some questions to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. Mr. Speaker, Albertans are appalled and disgusted to learn about the living conditions of numbers of ex-psychiatric patients in our cities. The government policy to support people to function with dignity outside of institutions fails miserably. Approximately 60 people are discharged monthly without adequate follow-up into the city of Edmonton. In many cases, they're living in substandard, squalid, unsafe, often exploited circumstances that lead to a deterioration in their condition and a return to the institution. They're abandoned, isolated, ignored. Mr. Speaker, I want to know on behalf of Albertans what steps the Minister has taken to correct this outrageous situation.
Mr. Speaker, I take strong exception to the honourable member's comments in lead up to her question. We have through the Alberta Mental Health Services, through the special housing program in Alberta Mortgage and Housing Corporation, through working with the Department of Social Services and working with a number of agencies of the government, attempted to put in place a comprehensive program that meets some of the needs, and I'd say a good deal of the needs of those individuals who are discharged from our institutions. And we will continue to work in that comprehensive, that coordinated effort, and even working with organizations that produce something, the Edmonton Coalition on Homelessness, working with those organizations to come up with a comprehensive plan for the residential and day care of these individuals to help them to facilitate their movement away from the institution and get them back into the community.
Mr. Speaker, it's not working. I'm reminded of several statements, noble statements in the social policy paper of the government. What then are, in fact, the government's standards for support and follow-up for ex-psychiatric patients?
Mr. Speaker, it is beginning to work, and I would challenge the honourable member to bring to me a name of an individual who, upon coming to Alberta Mental Health Services for assistance, either with a residential program or other needs that they have, but specifically a residential program, I would challenge the honourable member to give me that name of that person who we did not try to provide assistance to. We provide choices. We do our best, Mr. Speaker, to provide choices. Some of those choices are unacceptable to those who are now voluntary patients and are receiving voluntary services through Alberta Mental Health Services. But I challenge the honourable member to give me those names.
Time for question period. Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Edmonton Gold Bar, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister talks about meeting with the groups working on homelessness. Will the minister then tell the House what precisely his strategy is that he has worked out with these groups for a cooperative plan? The fire chief recognizes the need for some action. Why can't you?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the challenge that we have, again, is working in a coordinated effort with my colleague, the Solicitor General, with my colleague, the Minister of Social Services, is to put together plans along the lines of services through Alberta Mental Health Services, of self-funded group homes through working in cooperation with my colleagues. And I'll give the honourable member a perfect example of Imrie House in this city. And we fund Imrie House to the tune of about $60,000 a year. And funding is provided to the residents of Imrie House through the AISH program. And we provide assistance by funding a living skills coordinator and a program coordinator to help those who live in that home and others who come to it to use these services and to facilitate that transition back into the community. That's the kind of strategy and that's the kind of approach we'd like to take, Mr. Speaker. No, I'm not satisfied that we have done enough. There is more to do, but that is an example of the kind of approach we want to take in the days ahead.
Mr. Speaker, we don't need to hear an example of what we're going to take in the days ahead. We need some action now. And for the minister's information, those groups are operating housing are still operating at 81, 82 level funding. Will the minister then answer me this? Will the proposed advocacy that is in the new Mental Health Act, will that extend to discharged patients? And if not, why not?
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps my colleague, the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care, might want to supplement my answer. But the Mental Health Act, Mr. Speaker, is really been put in place for those patients who are involuntary patients of our mental health system. We have through Alberta Mental Health Services, working with my colleagues in government, working with the likes of the Canadian Mental Health Association and the Calgary Association of Self-Help, working with those community agencies to try to put together those programs that I've mentioned. That's just one example, is Imrie House. And we are doing more. We have some 450 residential spaces in place as of today in Edmonton, and I expect 50 more to be in place by the fall. And that's the approach we're taking, and we will continue. We will continue to provide as much as we can within the resources that we have available to us.
With respect to the role of the patient advocate as proposed under the new Mental Health Act, I would expect we'll have an opportunity to discuss that matter during committee study within the next few weeks. But I would say that the role of the mental health patient advocate is one that's designed for involuntary patients, but I would expect that would extend to involuntary patients once they're released from hospital.
To Edmonton Calder.
Supplementary to the minister. There is, in fact, a shortage in housing, though, for these people. And there are examples of many agencies that are attempting to deal with these patients. One being the Edmonton People in Need Society, which for 2 years have been trying to get funding from this minister. Why is it that they haven't been successful in getting their funding?
Mr. Speaker, the People in Need Society provide a very valuable service that is funded through the Social Services Department providing assistance, Alberta Income for the Severely Handicapped, AISH assistance, to the residents of the People in Need Society home. And that's taking the self-funded group home approach. And Mr. Speaker, Alberta has pioneered that kind of approach, that rather than the government's going out and setting up all of these homes, we've gone into partnership with the likes of the People in Need Society, with the Canadian Mental Health Association, and we will continue to do more of that. And that is the approach. We believe that is the wisest approach to take.
Thank you. Point of order. Point of order, Calgary Mountain View.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in question period, you ruled a question out of order. I presume, as being contrary to Standing Order 23G, referring to any matter pending in a court or before a judge for judicial determination. Mr. Speaker, I would ask you to consult the Blues, but I want you to know that I did not make any reference to the content of the case before the court. I asked about the steps that the Premier was taking towards achieving political negotiations to solve this case. The Premier's actions are not before the court. The Premier's meetings are not before the court. And in any event, none of these things in any way prejudice any person by that reference in my questions. Right. So I would ask you, Mr. Speaker, that to consult the Blues. I believe that ruling my first question out of order was not the right decision to take.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair really didn't need to hear the last sentence of your comments, but the Chair appreciates your personal opinion as offered, and the Chair has already sent for the Blues to review the whole matter and will indeed review the Blues overnight. Nevertheless, the Chair acted the way the Chair had to do in terms of the issue at that particular time. The Chair would also like to point out, for the benefit of all members of the House, that there's a growing practice of referring back and forth in question period to ministers of saying you or she and he, and that practice really ought to stop. In the parliamentary tradition, we refer to members either by their constituency or by the appropriate cabinet designation, and that practice really ought to cease, but it's been going on